I'll show you now the running order for today. What's on the agenda? Number one, we're going to be talking about prep. We've got to prepare our music ready to play on the CDJs. So we're going to look at the software to do that. And then number two, we're going to talk about connectivity, things you need to be aware of when it comes to CDJs and a mixer and how they connect, and just some things to be aware of, really. Number three is the CDJ Essentials. So we're going to dive relatively deep, but I really want to cover the essential things that you need to know when you step into a club, like how to navigate the CDJs, how to operate them properly. Because if you have a DJ controller at home and if you're playing, regularly on a controller, it might feel a bit unnatural to begin with to move on to CDJs. But rest assured, after these workshops, hopefully you'll be feeling confident. Number four, we're going to be talking similar, but with the mixer. So what's essential on the mixer that you need to know? How do you get the sound working properly? And just how do you navigate your way around what can look like quite a complex mixer, especially if you're coming from, again, a 2-channel controller onto some 4-channel mixer that, has a lot more buttons. Then number five, we're going to talk about the effects channel and setting up the effects channel. So there's a bit more involved when it comes to CDJs and a mixer on how to use the effects. And in this workshop today, we're going to talk about how to set it up effectively and properly. And then in next week's workshop, we're going to actually get creative with it and start doing some creative mixing with the effects, with the hot cues, with the looping, and start actually putting some of this into practice. But it's no good doing that until we know how to operate it and how to make sure we've got our music on there. Now, there might be people watching thinking, yeah, I know all of this. It's going to be a breeze, and that's great. I guarantee, though, please, please, please stick with me throughout, because there might be some nuggets in there that you can just pull out and extract and go, actually, that's something I wish I'd have known sooner, or that's something, I didn't know before, and that's going to make my life a lot easier now. So just stick with it, fill in the gaps of your own knowledge and just sit back, have fun. I'm going to be doing a lot of talking through this as well as demoing, so I might have to break and have some water at some point. Yeah. There's a lot of talking going on. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A where I'd love to, get you to put some questions in the chat, and I will do my best to answer as many as possible in the time that we have together today. And then we'll take it from there. So let's just have a quick check over on Zoom. Yes, 27 of you now. I'm just going to have a quick look through the chat before we get fully stuck in. Flex4, use CDJ in Pirate Studios. Connor's giving a wave. Joy said, got a Flex 4, practice on CDJs. Yamira, DDJ Flex 6, Newmark Mixtrack Platinum at home, but I have played on CDJs in Pirate. Got a DDJ 400, use CDJ in Pirate like the other person. SR2, yep, CDJs at Pirate. Only used at Pirate, but want to buy some CDJs, that's great. XDJ-RR, so again, got an all-in-one unit, but has played on CDJs, XDJ-RX. So it's great to hear that loads of you have played with CDJs. I'm guessing coming from Pirate, you've been in those studios and played on them. It's also great to hear that a lot of you actually have Pioneer DJ gear. Still, the Newmark Mixtrack, great controller, but a lot of you have Pioneer DJ gear, which definitely helps out with that transition to CDJs. So you hopefully have felt quite familiar with it. So yeah, let's get stuck in. So on the agenda, what you need for the club, some essentials. Now, I'd always recommend people make sure they have USB drives, not one, but 2. Important to have 2, and you'll find out in the connectivity section why. Number 2, some music. You're going to need some music, quite obvious. I'm just going to expand on that a little bit. Now, a lot of DJs who are using controllers might have started their journey with a streaming platform, because you can access millions of songs. You might have Beatport, you might have BeatSource, you might have Tidal, or you might have SoundCloud, especially for those Rekordbox users. Now, bear in mind that as it stands right now, there is only Beatport, which has streaming supported in CDJs. And even so, it's very new, and I wouldn't rely on it, because it needs the CDJs to be wired into internet in the venue, which is rarely the case. It needs to have the latest firmware, which is basically the computer stuff inside. It needs to be updated to the latest operating system. And if that's not the case, then you can't access that streaming. So don't rely on any streaming right now for taking it to the club. I would recommend sourcing some music, buying some music, downloading some music. Record pools, if you've never heard of a record pool, is a very common way to source a lot of music. It's, tools that websites set up for DJs, by DJs, where you can access thousands of songs with a monthly subscription, but you can download them songs, and then you can export those songs to a USB drive. Number 3 is some basic knowledge. It's well worth having some basic knowledge before doing your first gig. There might be some people watching right now who have done their first gig and winged it, and that is great. Props to you. But it'll definitely help if you have some basic knowledge of the equipment. Now, that doesn't mean you need to be a wizard and being super creative across all the equipment. It just means you need to know your way around and be able to mix track for track and be confident on them, and confident doing that. Number 4, some headphones. Now, it's one of those things. I'd highly recommend headphones, even if you're a DJ that's got really comfortable watching a laptop, checking things are in time, looking at those waveforms and going, yeah, that looks good. I would highly recommend getting used to using headphones to cue songs up, to preview songs, to make sure songs are in time. Because when you get in that loud club, if you're using USBs, it's not guaranteed you're going to have waveforms stacked on top of each other or things like that. Or you might be taking over from another DJ and they're playing some obscure BPM, or I don't know. There might be all sorts of instances. So we really highly promote people learn how to beat match using headphones, beat match, by ear as best as you can without any visual aids. So I definitely recommend headphones. You can see here, I've got quite isolating headphones. They cup to my ear quite tightly, and in loud environments, they can help, especially if you really want to do a lot of mixing in the headphones. You want to isolate that sound from what's going on out there. So some, decent quality headphones can definitely come in useful. Then we've got possibly some cables. So I put number 5 possibly. That's just because it depends on what the club has got. Now, you don't always need cables, but as you'll see when we get to connectivity, they can definitely save your back sometimes, just having some essential cables in your bag. So that's kind of what you need for the club. There is loads of stuff you can take. That's not that's not the whole list, but they are the essentials to really get by. Okay, so next thing, let me just check on the chat, see how everyone's doing. Yep, we're all good. Next thing we've got is the preparation. So I've got Rekordbox here. Whoa, look at that. Right. I've got Rekordbox here. I've made it a bit bigger so you can hopefully see the writing on your screen. I've made it, zoomed everything in as much as I possibly can, so hopefully you can follow along with all of this. Now, Rekordbox, if you're not already aware, is a Pioneer DJ software. And if you are in the chat, like you've said, and you've played on, a controller like the Flex 4, the Flex 6, you'll be used to this. This plugs in to those controllers, and it is a DJ software. And there are 2 layers to it. As you can see here, we've got export mode and performance mode up just underneath the Crossfader logo, which I know is a bit annoying. But you want export mode if you're going to be taking songs from the software to a USB drive. Performance mode is for plugging controllers in and for DJing with the software. Anything you prepare in this software works across both of those layers. So you can practice on your controller, set up hot cues, prepare your music, and then you can switch to export mode and export that music easily. I'm going to talk here as if no one's used this software before, and there might be some nuggets for those who have used this software before to pick up on. First of all, we need some music in there. Like I mentioned, streaming isn't really supported. You have got Beatport here and you can log in, but I wouldn't rely on it like I mentioned for those previous reasons. And I've got down this left-hand side here, collection, and then I've put one playlist in here for now. And then we've got related tracks, iTunes, Beatport, Explorer, devices, and you can see under devices I've got a USB drive plugged in here. So I'm going to show you the process, getting music into it. First of all, you can do something as simple as dragging and dropping. So in my Finder here, you'll see I've got our trusty Crossfader music pack, which is a royalty-free music pack that all of our customers get access to, and it helps with the tuition so that people can follow along with our courses step by step and use the exact music. And the simplest thing you can do is just take a folder of music and you can drag and drop that across onto playlists. It will then ask you analysis settings. What's the BPM range? You can leave that 70 to 130. And then I would check key here, so that you can analyze the key of the songs. You don't need phrase. You could analyze the phrase if you want. I don't think it's that accurate, really. So it's not a tool I would say rely on. So I leave that unchecked. So press OK, and you'll see it's made an EDM and dance playlist. And all of these songs now are analyzing. You can see this progress bar here and here and here. And once it's done, we get information like the key, the BPM, the waveform. If you can't see those things, right-click on any of these column headers. If I just press Control, If you right click on any of these, you can show up any of these different column headers. So you can add those things in there, you can drag them left and right, and you can start managing your music that way. I would definitely recommend, if you're new to DJing, start managing your music, start creating playlists. You could think about genres, you could think about energy level, you could think about BPM, the vibe, the specific set that you want to create. We've got a whole music management course that goes deep into this and getting your music library in check. But for now, I'd say the simplest way is to drag and drop, and you can drag them on here. If you don't do it that way, then you could go File and Import, and then import a folder, and you can do it that way. Now, the biggest thing to remember at this point is don't start moving things around. If I change the name of this to EDM and Dance 2, suddenly Rekordbox won't let me load any of these. You get this warning sign, and that means it can't find that file anymore. So when you're putting music into Rekordbox, remember that the music is still on your hard drive. So if you've downloaded it to a downloads folder, if you downloaded it to your desktop, it needs to stay there, or you need to relocate it. And there are different ways of doing this, but the main way is to display all missing files from the file option, and then you would relocate them files. For now, though, I am just going to simply take away that 2, and we should be able to, fingers crossed, play these. There we go. So once we load a track in, you can simply double click it. You can prepare this track. You can edit the grid of it here. So that is the information that's applied to the song, such as the BPM. The grid determines that BPM. Now, it being a software, it's not always 100% accurate, so you might need to go in there and make some adjustments. Something we cover in our beginner courses quite extensively, how to detect the right BPM if it is wrong. We can set things like hot cues, which we're going to look at from a creative standpoint next week. We can set up loops, and we can save those loops. But all of that stuff can be done on the computer, on your software. Before you even get to the club, you can do all of that stuff, and that's great. But then we need to make sure we can export that music correctly to our USB drive. Now, there's a lot of different sort of ways people approach this, and one of the most common ones is they will right-click on a playlist. If I just hold Control again, they will, right-click on a playlist, and then they will go export playlist to their drive, which mine's called No Name. Now, that's fine, but if you then have hundreds of playlists and you're picking and choosing, and then you've got to like delete them manually off the drive to make room, and then manually think, oh, is that the playlist I've updated? I can't remember. That can be a long process. So we always recommend using this thing called the Sync Manager, which is down in the bottom left-hand corner. And when you click this, a panel pops up. And this allows you to easily transfer stuff back and forth between the USB drive and Rekordbox. And there's something else to bear in mind here, which I'm going to show you in a second. So first of all, make sure you choose the device, which I've only got one plugged in. Make sure you tick this icon here, so that basically allows this device to be a Rekordbox device and put music on it. And then in this panel, the Rekordbox panel, we can simply check the playlist we want to move across. Now you'll see there are some other playlists here that are grayed out. That's because I did that on a different machine, so I can't amend those playlists. This is a new machine that I've got a new Rekordbox on, so I can add these extra playlists now that I've made on this new machine by pressing this arrow. And then we will see in the bottom corner here a progress bar in the bottom, just down here. And once that's done, it means those songs are on the device. Now, a lot of people, we get this email so many times, like, how do I check if this has been done right? How do I check that I've got music on my USB ready for that club gig? And a lot of reasons why people have probably booked to go into Pirate is to check that their USB is working properly. Now, don't be alarmed. If I go back to Finder, this is my device here. This is what it is meant to look like. You don't need to drag and drop files into here. I don't need to then go here and drag and drop these original files across. They are now on that device thanks to Rekordbox. Rekordbox has exported and sent those files to the device. And you'll see here it says Contents and Pioneer. So here are all of the songs in these artist folders. Don't worry, don't move any of them around. Just leave it. And then you've got a Pioneer folder here, which is like all the nitty-gritty XML files which allow the CDJ reads and says, okay, I can put these into playlists in a workable order on the CDJ. If you simply drag and drop files on there, you're relying on the CDJ to like analyze the music and prepare the music, and it doesn't do it very well compared to doing it prior to that on Rekordbox. So I'd always recommend, if you're new to CDJs, downloading Rekordbox and doing your preparation there. analyzing your music there, and then exporting it to the drive or device, your USB device. Now, a few extra things to be aware of here for those who already know all of that. If you click on your device, you can change some of these things. So you can change how some of the settings work on the CDJs and how you want things to show up and be visual on the CDJs. For example, the waveform color. I could say I want, when I plug my USB drive in, the waveforms to be the 3-band version or the RGB version. I can change the background color, and you can do all sorts. You can change the key display format from alphanumeric, if you know about mixing in key, to classic or back again. And there's a few different settings. You can choose the different category sort options across here. You can choose what the secondary column is. There's loads of options here that you can change. So it's something to bear in mind, because you can add all of these. For example, if you want to, organize your music a lot of the time by looking at it in BPM order, you could add BPM there, and that means that will show up on the CDJ as a category, which, you can still organize by BPM without that there, but you can dive into a specific BPM now and look for your whole USB drive, regardless of playlist, just by a single individual BPM, for example. Or if you know that you play certain genres a lot and you want to, manage your music by genres, then you could add that in there. So that's worth knowing about too. Other than that, keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate things. Get some good music management going. Get some good playlists set up. Once you get lots of playlists, feel free to then, if I right-click on here, you'll see I can create a folder and start to folder things. So you could title that whatever, a genre, and then you can put all your subgenres within that folder, and you can manage your library a bit further. So something else to bear in mind. Just quickly, last thing in the software, if we go to settings, if press this gear icon, go to analysis, just make sure that this is on normal, not dynamic. I know it sounds fancy. Don't choose dynamic. And make sure the track analysis settings you have key and BPM and grid checked. I'd just say for this, a lot of people go, oh yeah, that sounds better, dynamic. But actually what it's doing, it's overanalyzing it. A lot of music is structured perfectly to the beat, and dynamic is trying to analyze music that was maybe recorded live with drums, and there are fluctuations in the BPM. And then what happens is, if you've got a song which is recorded exactly to the beat electronically, it almost overanalyzes it and starts fluctuating the BPM throughout. You can analyze your music or reanalyze your music at any point by going to collection, which is everything, and then you can select multiple tracks, right click. I've got a different right click set up on this computer, which keeps throwing me, but right click and analyze tracks, and it will reanalyze it against those settings. So just again, something to bear in mind. So let's just jump onto Zoom. Everyone's looking good. Yes, someone said, and are the cues and loops saved as well? They are. And the cues and loops that you do, let me just move this. I know you're seeing a crazy effect going on right now. So the cues and loops, yes, they're saved to the individual songs. Basically, the XML file in Rekordbox that's like behind the scenes, all of that information stored in there. So when you next load that same song in, it will still have the cues and the loops. And when you export that using Rekordbox, not dragging and dropping, but using Rekordbox to export, yes, it will remember those cues and loops when you load that song. So then on the CDJs, you can tap a hot cue, you can, tap a saved loop, and it will activate it on an individual song. The next song you load has the loop specific to that song. It's not just remembering from the last song. So yes. Someone else said, I use Serato Pro. Is this supported on CDJs? Now, it is supported on CDJs. You'll need to use a mode called HID mode. And in the next section of this lesson, you'll get a brief overview of like where it would plug in on the CDJs. But we have a separate full-on dedicated video to that on our website, which you can go and check out. Just search HID mode, Serato, Crossfader, and it will take you step by step on how to set that up. So yes, you can. Tractor is the same, HID mode. So basically you can take your laptop and you can plug USB cables from your laptop into the CDJs and the mixer, and you can use them as a controller. It will make more sense in a second. So when you export the playlist, you will have cues, loops, but also the song, correct? That is correct. You'll have all of those things when you export using Rekordbox. Okay, let's move on to the next section. Thanks for those questions as well. They were very good questions. This next bit is about the connectivity. I filmed something just because it's easier to show you. A pre-filmed, just a little 6-minute video walking you through the back of a CDJ and mixer setup. While it's going on, if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat and I'll keep an eye on them for when this little segment finishes in about 6 or 7 minutes time. On the back of the CDJs, you have these red and white cables here. So if I unplug these, you'll see it's a red and white connection. This is audio out. And these are basically the audio cables you need to make sure are connected. And they route from here round into the mixer. Now you'll notice in the mixer that there are some stoppers here. If I take these stoppers out, you might find that on some mixers. Now what you want to just make sure is that the audio cables are connected to the line source, and they can be in any of these channels, 1, 2, 3 and 4. This just equates to what the channels are on the face of the mixer, 1, 2, 3 and 4. So make sure that CDJs on both sides are going into this line section, and you'll commonly find they're in channels 2 and 3 because it's central to the mixer and the crossfader. But you could put them in channels 1 and 2 and they'd just be off center in channels 1 and 2. It just relates to that. The phono is for plugging turntables in. As well, on the back of the mixer, we have this other audio output, which is digital out, as you can see here. Now that digital out goes to this corner of the mixer here. And again, it's just another way to send audio, and you might find it set up that way, and it's basically half of one of these. So just one cable going from here to this section here. So you might find it that way, but it's rarely set up that way, especially in, say, Pirate or most normal clubs. The way that you would usually see it there is maybe if it's at a festival or something and you've got big, loud, very high quality sound systems, it could be plugged in that way. So just check that. Lastly, on the actual CDJ, you've got your power, so make sure that's plugged in. And then there's two other things here. This one is called a link port, and this connects one CDJ to the other CDJ, and you can have a direct cable that goes from one to the other, or you could have a cable going from here and from here, and even from the mixer here down to a network hub like this. So you might see these in clubs as well, and this basically lets all three bits of equipment send data to each other, so it sends data between the three. A lot of the time in clubs though, you'll just get one cable going from one CDJ to another, and that means you can plug a USB in one and you can access the USB contents on the other. However, don't rely on that. Always have two USBs, because if this cable is not plugged in or it is faulty, you will need a USB in both of the CDJs. The reason why there's one on the mixer is it just helps with the effects channel. It makes sure the effects channel reads the data from the CDJ to keep the effects in time. But if it's not plugged in, don't worry. You can take control on the mixer itself and make sure the effects are set up right, which we're going to cover later. Then we have this, which is the USB, and that basically goes to your laptop. Now, if you're using Rekordbox with your laptop plugged in, or even Serato with your laptop plugged in, this is where you would use something called HID mode. Now, we're not going to cover that in this tutorial, but this is where you would plug your laptop in. And it means that you can use these CDJs very similar to how you would use a controller, and they act as a controller. You still then need to connect your laptop somehow to the to the mixer, and that can be done on the top. And you have a USB port on the top. But like I said, we've got a separate tutorial for that if you're interested. But that is how you would connect a laptop to all three devices. Then on the back of the mixer, you can see we've already covered these channels here. We've also got things called send and returns, which are to do with external guitar pedals or effects units, and you can plug them in there. Something a bit more advanced that you don't need to worry about. However, here it's quite important. We've got the Master 1 and Master 2. This Master 1 is a big XLR cable, and it looks a little bit like this. Now that cable goes to the master speakers. They're the main speakers in the club or in the, wherever you are. And that relates to this on top. So you can see here this master level. That changes the overall level of the club speakers or the main speakers. So that's something to be aware of. Again, anything coming out of this, which is also an RCA, will be controlled by that same control on the top. You then have record out. So if you've got an external recorder, you can plug it in here. I'm just sending the audio from this tutorial to the computer so that you can hear it, but you can plug in external recorders here and it will record everything coming out of the mixer. Then you have a booth here. So a booth monitor is something that you find in a lot of clubs, and it's to help you mix and stay on time with your beats. It gives you direct audio inside the DJ booth rather than a reverberated audio that's bounced off the walls in the club and is coming back to you in a bit of a delay. So the booth is plugged in here. These are called jack outputs. And then if we just go to the top of the mixer, just move my laptop, this here is the booth control. And you can turn this up and down when you're in a club. This doesn't affect what the audience hears. This is just for you. And by turning this up and down, you can then hear a nice loud version of the music to mix. You could turn it down between your transitions, turn it back up when you want to mix in. It gives you that extra control over the audio so you can mix it well. And that would be plugged in there. 90% of clubs have them, but don't be alarmed if there isn't. You're probably better just mixing using your headphones and make sure you're on time in your headphones first, which we'd always recommend too. Then you don't really need to worry about these other things. Again, I mentioned the link. This master out is another one of these, but just for the digital. So it could be plugged in that way, but very rarely. And then here we have the two microphones, microphone 1 and microphone 2, two different inputs for the microphone. This is an XLR, the other one's a jack, and you can control the microphones on the top of the mixer. So that's where they would plug in. And there you have the back of the DJ mixer and CDJs. Just to recap, make sure these cables, the red and white ones, are plugged in right, and make sure it's powered up. Everything else, even the link cable, might not be plugged in, but this is where your audio is going to come through, and this is what's important. If this isn't connected, then you're not going to get audio. Lastly, make sure that if this is connected and you're still not getting audio, it could be to do with the top of the mixer. So here you can see we have this channel input selector, and you want to make sure that this is online so it matches the back. If it's on phono, then it's reading this one, which has the plugs in. If it's on return and aux, then that's something separate. If it's on laptop A or B, then that relates to the laptop ports here, A or B, if you're using HID mode. So make sure that that is online if it's connected via line. Hello, I'm back. Sorry about that. It automatically kept me on mute. Yeah, thanks for calling that in quick. So just to recap, I was just saying then when I was on mute that you've got to remember that the CDJs and the mixer are 3 separate units. So there needs to be a way for it to send audio between them or data between them, and that's where the audio cables and the data cable, the link cable, come into play. And just going back to earlier in this tutorial, they are the cables that if you were going to take extra cables to the club, I'd recommend throwing some of them in your bag. The red and white RCA cables and the Ethernet cables, which are the link cables. Now, Ethernet cables are prone and known to get damaged quite easily, and even the ports on the back of CDJs, if they get a lot of wear and tear, can get damaged quite easily. So even sometimes they're plugged in and it's just not reading the opposite USB drive. So please, please, please make sure you always have a backup USB, an extra backup, have 3 if you can. You know, never underestimate the power of having backups, because you never know what situation you end up in and what the state of the equipment is. And the last thing you want to do is rock up to a club and not be able to do your set, or leave a promoter or a manager like, I can't even play any music, and that's going to look bad on you as well. It's not just on them for maybe not having the right cables. Make sure you're prepared and have those multiple USBs. So once that's all done, now we're going to look at the CDJs in the mixer. We're going to talk about some of the things to be aware of on there. So we're going to go top down. We're going to look at the CDJs. First of all, I've got USB drive plugged in here, and you'll want to press this source button on the top. This is where you choose the different sources, whether it's a USB drive. If, like I've mentioned a few times, you're using HID mode, your laptop will pop up here if it's plugged in. You'll see that I've got Beatport streaming here. Now that is because that Ethernet port is then connected to that network hub, which I showed you, and that network hub is connected to a router, which is connected to the internet. Trust me, Not many venues have got it set up that way, so just reiterating, don't rely on Beatport streaming to have music in the club yet. Then we can just use this. It's a touch screen and we can tap on the device. But before I do that, I want to show you this My Settings load. In Rekordbox earlier, I showed you about changing some of the settings on your USB drive. If you've done that, you can tap this here and it will load those settings into the CDJ and make it as close as match as possible. Depending on the CDJ, there are different models of CDJ with slight variations to them, so it will always do its best to make it, map out how you want. Then we can just tap on here and we're into the CDJ, the USB now. The USB drive on the CDJ 3000s is, the screen is touchscreen and we can navigate through it. It's a nice big screen. If you don't have the touchscreen on an older model, you can use this rotary knob here to scroll up and down. The main thing to be aware of is going back and forth in layers. So this back button here sends you back layers right back to the overall USB, which is this view. And then we can click in this encoder to go into different playlists, scroll up and down, go into a folder, scroll up and down, go into a playlist and scroll up and down, and then go back again. Or if you like the touchscreen, you can use a touchscreen and you can tap across, tap into the specific playlist you want, tap over to this right side and you're in that playlist. You can organize the playlist with this drop down here. You can organize it as default, which would be if you were to drag and drop the files in a certain order in Rekordbox, that is the default order. So if you've got a specific set list where you play track 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this order, that's your default order. But you could organize it by artist or album or rating, and you can add them in there. You can also use this here and ascend or descend using the BPM. Now, if you don't have the touchscreen and you're on an older model of CDJ, then you would use the menu and sort option. So you go menu and it would come up, this menu button. You can click in to say sort by BPM and it will put them all in BPM order. On here as well, let me just show you can make the text bigger and smaller, something worth knowing, especially in a club. And then that's the basics of just navigating through a playlist. But it's also worth noting down this left-hand side, you've got some other options. So you could just tap on artist, and then you can scroll through all your artists across your whole drive. You can tap on album, for example. Track is everything on your USB drive. So if you're unsure what to play next, you could go on everything and you could start, organizing by BPM and scrolling through it all. Clicking in, scrolling through it all and finding, the next song that you want. Then we've got key. So you can go through all the different keys and choose a song that potentially maybe works in key with the one you're currently playing. We've then got playlist, which I've just shown you. We've got history, which is really useful. When you play music on your USB drive, it will record it into this history here, and you can re-import that history back to your Rekordbox software. And then you can take inspiration from that history, and it's a good way of, picking up inspiration from your live gigs. Then you've got matching, which is something a bit more advanced, and then folder. So folder here, if you were to drag and drop files, like I said, from your Finder, from one Finder window to another, the original files, if you'd never opened Rekordbox and you drag them onto that USB drive, then they would show up here. Not in playlist, not in anything else, they just show up here. And they would just be organized in whatever folders you have on the actual root folder of the USB drive. So this is why it's important to export through Rekordbox, because it allows us to create these playlists. It gives us all the information we need, such as the waveforms and the BPMs right there and then, without having to load the track into the player. More advanced, you do have things like preview mode on the CDJ 3000. So again, if they are all linked and able to send data via those link cables, you can hold on the waveform and you can preview by using the mixer, and you press this link preview here and you can listen to and preview without even loading the song into the deck. Now, when it comes to loading the song in the deck, you can literally scroll, you can tap the load button, or I just like to click in this encoder. If I just go back in here and I'll just load something in here, we can just click it in and it loads up like this. So that's how we would get a song loaded, ready to play. Some other things to bear in mind is you might want to change the waveform. So we can actually scroll in and out by turning this encoder, and we can get a faster waveform. We can scroll back out and we can get, see more of the waveform. At the bottom, we have the full overview waveform, the structure of the track, but that's just something you can zoom in and out of. Well worth knowing. Also, if you press this shortcut button here, just underneath the encoder, we can access some other things on the device. This one's quite good. On the CDJ 3000s, we have waveform current position, and it's currently in the center. You could switch this to left, and then if I go back, you'll see that the current position here is now at the left. So I see more waveform that's to come, which is very useful because I don't need to see what's been, I just need to see what's coming up. And if this is in the center, there's less of it. Left, there's more of it. And again, if I zoom out, I get even more of it still. So just one of those little things that can be quite useful. Also in Shortcut, we have things such as the quantized beat value, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and beat jump value. But also we have the brightness, which is something worth knowing about when you're going to clubs, because you know, you might find that actually it's too bright and it's just glaring at you in a really dark club and it's hurting your eyes, you know, constantly looking for tracks, or vice versa. It looks really dim and you need it to be a bit brighter. And you can change that here. You can see it changes the brightness, and they're really good on the CDJ 3000s. Then we have the LCD brightness, which is here as well. So you can mess about with them and get them to your preference. I'm just going to drop that down for this video. Hopefully that's a bit nicer. We can change the waveform color as well. So RGB ultimately shows the track in red, green, and blue. And you can see in the overview waveform that we've got different bits here. So we've got like the green bits are all about sort of like the higher frequencies. The red bits are lower frequencies, and we can visualize the waveforms in that way. But then they brought out this 3-band, and now we just see it very simply as the blue is the low end, the orange is the mids, and the whites, really light yellows, are the highs, which equate back to a mixer here. So it's very much like, okay, I know there's a lot of low end in this track, or I know there's a lot of mid at this section in the track. And you can see the peaks of the waveform on this overview, that this section here, for example, it's got more orange and white than it's got blue. So I know there's more higher frequencies, middle and higher frequencies in this section. And then in this section, there's more blue, so I know there's more lower frequencies, and you can see it quite clearly. So again, personal preference, and you can choose, I'd say, between RGB and blue. Let's leave it on, sorry, RGB and 3-band. Let's leave it on 3-band for now. Another thing that you'll probably find quite useful or want to know about is if the CDJs are linked, and you do rely a bit on, you know, using some visual cues to help you out, which is fine. You know, like I said, I always practice, you know, not relying on them. But what we can do is, let me just get something loaded on the opposite CDJ. So if I load a song here, just load anything in. Right, so when I play this song, sorry, I'll do it the other way around. You can see here, I'm playing a track on the opposite side, and you can see the waveform above, and that's because it's linked via that data cable. And you can see when it's starting to go out of time, and you might want to put it in time. Now, how is that set up? Well, it basically reads off whatever the master deck is. So you can see over here, this says master because I forced it to that position. So if I had this track on, I can then mix this in. And you can see when it's out of time and see when it's more in time. So that's something that's quite useful. And then when I mix fully across and I cue the opposite side up, you'll see master jumps over here. And the same thing will happen on the opposite side. You might see a little bit of it here. Just that waveform scrolling along. So like I said, I'd highly recommend not relying on that. Not relying on, you know, using those visuals, but have a play with them. I've just realized it might be playing some audio in the background. Let me know if there's any delay on the audio or there's something going on with it, because I keep getting bits of it coming through my system. So next, we would then look at thinking, okay, how do we manipulate the record? How do we, you know, control the record? This just simply comes back to using the jog wheel. Now, if you've got a controller already, you'll know how to control using the jog wheel. We use clockwise to make it faster temporarily, anti-clockwise to make it slower. What you might not have though is a jog adjust, and this changes the feeling of that jog wheel, something well worth knowing about. So if the jog wheel's on heavy, as much as I spin the jog wheel, it kind of comes to a halt and doesn't run away. If I put it on light, it spins away. Great for pullbacks, spin backs. If you want to do a really long pull up, then light can be great. But for control in nudging it and keeping it in time, then maybe you want it on heavy. I'm just going to grab a drink. Apologies, just realised it wasn't top down. Someone's saying Phil needs to mute himself. Let me see if I can just sort that out. Mute all. Right. Hopefully that has fixed the Phil issue. Sorry about that. Right, okay, cool. Let's get stuck back in. So I just noticed that I was talking about the jog adjust there and it wasn't on the top down. Apologies for that. This jog adjust here allows for that fast spin back like I just showed you when it's on light, or if it's on heavy, it'll just stop and it gives you more control over the deck itself. So that's something you might not have on your equipment, but this is just personal preference. Find what feels right for you for nudging the tracks in time and adjust this accordingly. Cue and play button, pretty standard. Hold the cue button for the track to play, press play and it will continue, or we can use the cue to tap in time and then press play to set it off. Hopefully you may be already aware of that if you've touched DJ equipment before. Then something else to be aware of is this tempo range. Great, we can speed the track up by bringing it down to the plus icon here, slow it down by going to minus. If you have DJ equipment, that should be pretty standard. But what is a bit different is this master tempo just above. So if you put master tempo on, what it does is it locks the key of the song whether you go faster or slower. So if it's down here or up here, it will speed the track up and slow it down, but it doesn't change the pitch. If I turn this off, you get this riding pitch. And if I nudge the track, now CDJs are very good at keeping that pitch correct if you put master tempo on, and if you are finding that you're nudging the track a lot like this to keep it in time, it'll just sound much neater with master tempo on. When it's off, as you can hear. Something else to be aware of is this, the tempo range, which changes the range of this. So the button above, at the moment it was on plus or minus 10, and I've just changed it to plus or minus 16% and wide, and then back to plus or minus 6, and you can toggle through these. And now at 10%, we can go 10% faster, 10% slower, 16% faster or slower, and then wide, it goes 100% faster and slower. So if you ever find yourself on CDJs and someone's left it on this setting, you might be nudging the BPM and thinking it's changing really drastically, and suddenly we've hardly moved it here, but we're getting extremely fast or extremely slow. So that's where you want to change the range here. I have it on plus or minus 10, but probably plus or minus 6 or plus or minus 10 are probably the best places to keep it. But just make sure you've got it on a setting that works for you, and you're aware of that, because common, it could just be left on a different setting from a different DJ, and well worth knowing about. The other thing to know as well is this vinyl and CDJ mode. So the jog mode here, we can toggle between vinyl and CDJ. When on vinyl, we can use the top of the jog wheel to manipulate it, even when the track's playing, so we can use it to scratch. But on CDJ mode, the top just acts as a nudge, so it's just like the edge of the jog wheel. Slows it down, speeds it up. The reason why I wanted to show this though is if you press pause on CDJ mode, this is something that won't happen on your controller. You get this stuttering sound. Don't worry, you haven't broken anything. But as you move the jog wheel now, it picks up whatever the sound is in front of it and stutters it. And this is just a really old school way of how people used to have to cue up the records. Before there were waveforms, you had to use, that sound to find the beat that you wanted to cue up on, because you didn't have visual waveforms on the old CDJs. So don't worry, if I put it back on vinyl, it stops that stuttering. You can move it around and you can use the visual to your advantage to set up a cue point. But I just wanted to make you aware of that, because that's something totally unique to CDJs, is that stuttering sound. You haven't broken anything. The rest of the stuff on here really is sort of stuff that we're going to cover a lot more next week. These are your hot cues here, so you can jump to any point in the song. This is your looping controls, your beat jump controls. Again, covering it more next week. What you really need to know is how to set up a cue point, so you can go through and find your cue, press the cue button, and you've set up a new cue. There's an orange marker there. You could scroll through, set up a new cue, and that's setting a cue on your track. You need to know how to get your tempo range correct, and then if you're going to use master tempo, that's where we put it on, and then the vinyl and CDJ mode. So they're the main things to be aware of. next week we'll cover more of the stuff on the CDJs. So hopefully that made sense to people. I'm going to check out the chat in a minute, but before that, let's have a look at the mixer. Again, we're talking about essentials this week. I'm looking at the time too. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to run through the essentials of the mixer before our last Q&A. First of all, crossfader and channel faders. How to get volume out of your mixer. Check that these are right, like I mentioned earlier. Are they lined up with how it's plugged in? The input selector, is it on line if it's plugged into line at the back? I'm on channels 2 and 3 here. Then make sure your trim level here just underneath isn't all the way down. You won't hear anything. So that's another thing. That's a volume control. And the trim level's there to help you balance tracks that potentially, some tracks are produced louder than others or quieter than others. So you can use the trim if both faders are at the top and one track's produced a lot quieter than another one. You can use that to compensate and boost the volume of it. Just make sure you don't boost it right up into the reds and this starts flashing where it says clip, because that's redlining and it will damage the audio quality that's coming out of the speakers and just won't sound great. So make sure they're up. And then these are your channel faders. You can use them to fade in and out, just like any piece of DJ equipment. Lastly, if you've done all that and you've still got no audio, check the master. Master level is the one going out to the club speakers, and just check where that's at, and you might need to bring that up as well. Make sure on the master channel here that the balance isn't one side or the other. You might, I don't know if you can hear me going left and right there. Make sure that's in the middle, because otherwise it's going to be like audio coming out of one side of the club or the other. So check that as well. And we've already mentioned the booth monitor. Then coming down here, the crossfader. If you're not using the crossfader, it's mainly used for cutting and scratching nowadays. If you don't use it, then make sure these selectors are switched to through. When these are on through, it means the crossfader becomes inactive. Whereas when this is on B, for example, it will work on the B side, but not on the A side. So another common thing when people get to clubs, they might be mixing and they might not realize this is knocked over and these are set like this, and they're mixing in and there's like, oh, it doesn't sound right. And actually, that needs to be in the middle. Or if you're not using it, turn these off. If you are using it and they're set like this, the crossfader curve is something to be aware of as well. Make sure if you're cutting and scratching, it's on this icon, which is like a little picnic bench, and then you get a nice cut. Or if you're mixing and blending with it, which isn't really used nowadays, but if you do, then have it on the opposite side where you can blend and it's like a volume fader across. Bear in mind, if it's switched over here and the crossfader has been left in this position, this song will always be louder than this song because it's balanced over this way. So just something really, keep checking. When you get into the club, turn these on to through if you don't use it. Make sure that, the crossfader's turned off. Or if you do use a crossfader, it's set up how you need it to be set up. Then another essential on the mixer, I'd say be aware of this EQ curve here. We've got a whole video about the difference between isolator and EQ. But be aware, if you mix a lot of electronic music, house music, dance music, music that's very obviously for the clubs, you probably want it on isolator. If you mix a lot more popular music, radio, things that you'll hear on the radio, hip hop, R&B, things like that, you probably want it on EQ. Now, we've got a whole video on why, both within our courses and on YouTube. If you search isolator versus EQ, you'll probably find it. But that's what I'd recommend there. That relates to the EQs, which allow us to balance between the mix, which we'll talk more about in next week's workshop. And then lastly, just make sure we're going to cover the effects in the center here in how to use them next week, but make sure these are all in the center position and not left like this or like this. Here is where we turn them on and off. So if that's flashing, it's active, and if you've left it like this, it might sound a bit different. If I turn it off, we're going to get the audio how we want it. So something else to be aware of is how they are set up there. Then headphones, plug in down at the bottom down here. Then we can change the level here, which is just how loud the headphones are. Above that is the master and cue mix. Now, if you've not used this before, then you probably don't need to worry about it if you still feel confident mixing. Or maybe you do use it on your controller, and then this is how it works on this equipment, because there might be one extra button you need to press, which is this one, the master cue. If that's not pressed, this cue mixing master knob will not do much. to help you. So how this works is if you have it on the Q side, it will just play any of them through the headphones. If you have it on the master side, it will play what's coming out of the master speakers through the headphones. And if you have it in the middle, it will play any of these that are lit up and this one through the headphones. Why is that useful? Well, this allows you to then balance and say, I want more of these channels, or I want more of what's playing out of the speakers, and you can move back and forth between. It also allows you to mix in the headphones too. So if I were playing a track here and I wanted to mix this track in, once I bring the fader up, I could bring this all the way over to master, and now I can hear what everyone in the club can hear, and I can kind of balance my EQs and my fading just from what is being played out of the main speakers. So you put yourself in their shoes a little bit if you're used to mixing in the headphones. Some DJs though, what they'll do is they'll take the headphones down, bring them off their head, and then use the environment to mix rather than do it all in the headphones. So just something else to bear in mind. Other than that, that's kind of the basics of the mixer. You'll find that across all of, the DJ and mixers from Pioneer, and they're the essentials from this side, all the volume stuff that you really need to be aware of. Then we've got the effects channel. The effects channel, I'm going to run through the setup now. We're going to recap it next week as well, so don't worry. Hopefully we'll see everyone that's here now next week, where we're going to be using the effects, using the hot cues, using the looping, actually getting some creative DJing going on. But the effects channel I'm going to quickly run through because it's something that, again, gets asked a lot by DJs who are moving to the club. First, you have your screen here. This is really useful. You want to use this screen to your advantage to make sure it's set up correctly. You'll see at the top it says echo. I can use this selector here to change through all my effects. When I sit on an effect I want, I then move down. Auto, which means it's automatically trying to detect the BPM, but the BPM is flashing at the moment. Now it's trying to read what the BPM is on the channel I've got selected. What channel have I got? Here on this selector underneath, I'm trying to choose between the channels, and you see it highlights on here as I move across which channel it's going to apply it to. So if I wanted it on channel 3, I've then got it on channel 3, but there's no audio playing, so it's flashing thinking, where's that beat? When I press play, boom, we get that locked in and that BPM is solid. Then a lot of the time people think, right, I'm good to go, I'm on the right channel, I've got my effect, and I'm ready to go. I'm going to hit the on button now. Have a listen. If I press on now with the level up, doesn't sound like a great echo, and that is because of this all-important beat fraction. Now on a controller, this will always be pretty much bang on the beat and it should sound okay, but you can see that these two are flashing this 1/4 and that's because it's somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2, because there's this extra feature, the time feature, which is found on mixers. So make sure that this is locked on a specific fraction. So we've got a 1/4 beat here, a 1/2 beat there, and we can change the beat fractions using these buttons, and we can go up and down. We also have this X pad which we can tap and move across, and it will apply the effect at the same time as tapping it. But the main thing to bear in mind is if you are somewhere between, like this, let's wait for it to come back, and they're flashing, it's not going to sound great. So that is one of the key takeaways. Make sure you're locked in on a beat fraction. Level here, you can come up to this 12 o'clock position, which is 100%. The on and off switch at the bottom will turn the effect on and off. If it's not reading the same BPM as the channel that you selected on, you can manually put it in by holding tap and then twisting the time knob here, and you can change the BPM manually. You can hold tap and the auto tap button next to it, and you can change the decimal place as well. If you do all of that though, it will stay on that BPM until you hold this button again and it jumps back to auto. So it will automatically try and detect the BPM. So there are a few things to keep in mind. Okay, we've got a few minutes for Q&A. Let's move over. Anyone in the chat got any questions? I'll try answer them as quick as possible. I'm happy to stay an extra few minutes. I'm not in a rush, so obviously stick around. I appreciate if other people are potentially in a rush. Write your questions in the chat and I'll run through as many as I can. Just while you're writing your questions in the chat, we're going to say this, everyone. you can get 35% off all our DJ courses over at wearecrossfader.co.uk using the code PIRATE35, and that code's going to work for the next month while we're running these workshops. Any individual course you can get 35% off, and we do have specific courses. One in particular, the CDJ Masterclass course, which is all of this stuff diving way deeper, something that you can, watch back any time and reference at any time. It goes deep into the HID mode stuff that we've mentioned briefly in this tutorial. But there's loads of other courses there, how to get gigs, beginner intermediate courses, genre-based courses. Or you can just get the whole lot with our complete package bundle, which is basically like 90% off all courses. And you get every course that we ever make in the future as well. So you'll see that on the website if you go over to it. Just jumping back to the Q&A, let's go over to Zoom. I'm just going to take a quick drink of water as well. Someone said, can I watch this back? I'm going to send an email out tomorrow to all of you who have attended, and I'll get a link in there for you to watch this back, for sure. So make sure you check out that email, and there'll be that discount in the email as well, so you don't have to try and remember it now. You can see it tomorrow. It'll be sometime later tomorrow. What USB brands do you recommend? SanDisk. I've always used SanDisk. I think they're a reputable brand for storage. So, yeah, SanDisk. If you want to use Rekordbox on laptop as the library instead of USB, would you plug the laptop into the CDJ or into the mixer? There are different ways to do this. Again, covered in our CDJ Masterclass course, there are different ways. If you've got all the link cables plugged in, like I said, you can literally go straight into the mixer, nothing else, and it will all connect. Or if you don't have the link cables all connected to the mixer and the CDJs, you will need USB cables going to the CDJs as well. Bit of a setup thing to get your head around. It's worth knowing both ways, depending on where you're going, what club you're going to, and what setup you're going on. Someone said, would you use the record out to a laptop to record a mix? I've never really figured this out on a CDJ before. So a lot of the time in the past, you can get external recorders, like I think Zoom, not Zoom, what we're on now. Zoom is an audio brand as well. You can get Zoom recorders that you can plug line in directly in from the record out and like record onto an SD card. I think Reloop actually made a little recorder, like a Reloop cassette recorder thing that you plug a USB into and you can record directly from there. If you want to record your sets directly from the mixer, you can actually go straight from your laptop into one of the USB ports on the top, which I showed you, and you can record that way. Again, a bit of setup going on behind the scenes in the utility settings of the DJ mixer. So that's a program that you can install on your laptop to basically say anything that plays out the mixer, send it to my laptop so I can hit record on this software. So that's something that you can do. What else have we got? Right, perfect question. Hannah said, I've played on some CDJs where the track loaded would autoplay. How do you turn that function off? Great question. This here, auto cue button, it says time mode, and then there's a bar on the right-hand side that says auto cue. It shows here on the screen. If I hold this down, it will disappear off the screen. Now, if I go browse and I go into another song, I press play, boom, it just plays automatically. Really annoying, right? Put auto cue on by holding this down. Now when I load a track, stop this track. Boom, it doesn't play. It automatically puts a cue point there. It might not be the right cue. It might not be on the very first beat. You might have to do some adjusting and set up your cue, but that's how we do it. Very good question. Would you recommend normalizing your tracks, and if so, what software? I can't really recommend any software for this. I've not done it personally myself. I would always use the trim control to balance the tracks and get them to sound, the levels to sound right throughout the mix, but maybe. I can't really give much recommendation on that. Any headphone recommendations would be helpful. Sennheiser HD25s. I do actually like on the cheaper end of the scale, the Pioneer HDJ Q1s. More expensive end of the scale, the Pioneers are good as well. V-moders that I've got on my head now are good, but do ache a little bit after a long period of time because they're a bit heavier. People are saying awesome. Thank you. I appreciate you. Anyone else? When a track gets played to the end, how do you stop it automatically playing the next track in your playlist? I've turned on auto cue, but it's happened a couple of times now. Yes. Let me just double check this. Right, okay. Let's go back to the top down. So if you get to the end of a song here, and it gets to the end, and then it automatically plays the next song and loads the next song in your playlist, then you can change the setting by holding the menu button down. This gets us into the utility settings. The bottom of DJ setting, we have play mode. So if I just click in here, scroll down, if play mode is on continue, it will continue through the playlist. If it's on single, it'll keep it where it is, and it'll just basically stop at the end of the song. So hopefully that answered your question. Someone else said sometimes the tempo gets stuck where you can change the tempo slider, but the tempo doesn't change. Then it takes a big movement in the tempo slider to get it to work again. Why is that? My initial thought is that if you're using sync, this will be why. So if I... Oh, you can just see the BPM there. That's good. So if I were to play these two tracks, and I move the BPM here, and then I press sync, you'll see now it's synced the BPM. Sorry, it's synced the BPM here, 124.6 to 124.6. But the original BPM here, where the tempo fader is currently, it's grayed out. I don't know if you can quite see it. It says 130.9. Now that means that I would have to go back to 124.6 to catch it back in time. So it's where the tempo fader is on here. So if I turn beat sync off, it's to stop you from turning beat sync off and then it knocking it out of time. It still is synced now. So now watch what I have to do on this side. Move tempo slider to current BPM. So I've got to change this grey back to 124.6. And then it catches back in time and I can move it and change the tempo of this track. That could be the first thing. The only other thing I can think of is on some CDJs, if there is a little click in the middle here where the 0 position is, it might take a bit of a nudge for it to get out of that click, but that's usually on turntables, not on CDJs. So it's potentially, let me know if you think if you're using sync at that time when that happens. If not, I'll have to have another think about it. Yeah, awesome. Thank you for your time. No problem. Yeah, we'll be back next week. Does Rekordbox automatically save changes to library playlists, etc. in the background, or do I have to manually tell it to save? Nope, it will save any hot cues, any grid markers, anything like that you change. It will automatically save it. You don't need to click a save button, but I would recommend backing up your library, which is something you can do in Rekordbox. Shout out to everyone that is still here. I know a few of you have to leave. Basically, just as a quick one, what are we going to get next week? Well, it's going to be a case of going through the hot cues, going through the looping, going through the effects, and really DJing. So we're going to get stuck in. If you've got any last minute questions, I'll hang around for 2 or 3 more minutes, but we're going to wrap it up now. Excuse me. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you for being here. Well, it sounds good. I'll see everyone next week, and appreciate you all. Peace out. Romel says, some of my tracks were changing BPM while I was playing. Was it because of the track? Yes, it is probably because it was on dynamic. If you haven't touched the tempo adjust and the track's readout, the BPM of the readout is changing, it will be because of that dynamic mode, which I mentioned earlier. So just reanalyze it in normal and see if it still happens. It shouldn't do. Cool. Right, I'm going to wrap it up there. I know it's getting late now here in the UK, but thank you so much. I'll see you all next week. Tell your friends about it, and let's get this built up over the next 3 weeks, and we'll see more of you hopefully next week as well. Peace out.